I will say I love being a minister of a church where Enya, George Harrison, Paul Simon, Frank Sinatra, and Rush can share the stage. I am the captain of my soul. I am the master of my fate. Oh, those Victorians. They love to think that they did everything on their own. For centuries, Western philosophers and theologians have asserted that civilization itself depends on the belief in and exercise of free will. Our modern code of ethics is even based on this assumption that we can freely choose between right and wrong. Enlightenment philosopher Immanuel Kant even weighed in, so you know it's serious, reaffirming this link between freedom and goodness. For if we are not free to choose, then there is no reason to argue in favor of making virtuous moral choices. And even as our scientific understanding has evolved, the assumption of free will still runs throughout our culture and politics, from welfare provisions to criminal law. It permeates our popular culture and provides a framework for what we call the American dream, the belief that anyone can make it, regardless of where they started out in life. Every time I say the phrase American dream, I want to put like a little asterisk and say results may vary. Because of course, we know that that dream is not as equally accessible to everyone who seeks it. But let's talk about brains. Brain scanners have enabled us to peer inside a living person's skull, revealing an intricate network of neurons and allowing scientists to reach broad agreement that these networks are shaped by both genes and environment, that old nature versus nurture debate. But there's also agreement in the scientific community that the firing of these neurons determines not just some or most, but all of our thoughts, hopes, memories, and dreams. The 20th century nature-nurture debate that I referenced a second ago prepared us to think of ourselves as shaped by influences beyond our control. Are our actions the unfolding effect of our genetics, or the outcome of what has been imprinted on us by our environment? There's impressive evidence to support each factor. Whether scientists supported one, the other, or a mix of both, they increasingly have come to assume that our deeds must be determined by something. But it still left some room, at least in the popular imagination, for the possibility that we could overcome our circumstances or our genes to become the author of our own destiny. The challenge posed by neuroscience is more radical. It describes the brain as a physical system, like any other, and suggests that we no more will it to operate in a particular way than, say, we could will our heart to beat. The contemporary scientific image of human behavior is one of neurons firing, causing other neurons to fire, causing our thoughts and deeds in an unbroken chain that stretches back to our birth and beyond. In principle, we are completely predictable. If we could understand any individual's brain architecture and chemistry well enough, in theory, we could predict that individual's response to any given stimulus with 100% accuracy. In this sense, we are essentially biological robots, organic robots, if you prefer. And when I think about that, I think about this too much, I start to feel like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz when she pulls back the curtain and realizes that the wizard is just a guy with a megaphone. So I guess the feeling that I'm trying to describe is disillusionment. But disillusionment is inevitable in the pursuit of enlightenment. Because another thing is also happening in that moment for Dorothy. She is seeing things as they are, not as she wishes them to be, with a fuller knowledge that she had when she was uninitiated. Her idealism might have melted away, but she is no longer just a viewer. She and companions are now participants in this story. And if she hadn't pulled back that curtain, she might never have made it home. If we are to be participants in our own lives, we need to be able to see the seams and the cracks in our own beliefs, even those so fundamental that we take them for granted. And free will is a foundational idea in Unitarian Universalist faith. And we celebrate our freedom of belief because we feel that it is essential to our collective identity. UU ministers often get up in pulpits and proudly claim for us the title of heretics, citing the etymology of the word heretic, meaning one who chooses. We are the people who choose. Without the ability to choose, we cannot be free, and we affirm that freedom is the human birthright. Historically, side note, many Unitarian and Universalist Protestants during the Protestant Reformation found themselves in hot water, or sometimes at the stake, hot flames, when they clashed with powerful Calvinists who for their refusal to accept the biblical basis for predestination. The Calvinist predestination idea, basically, that God had already chosen who was going to heaven and there was really nothing we could do about it. I know it's more complicated than that, but instead, our forebears in the 15th and 16th century believed in salvation through works, affirming that the choices we make matter, not just in our own lives, but in a cosmic sense. Hence the cosmic theme. But we've come a long way from the Protestant Reformation and the Enlightenment, though we still firmly hold to the belief that what we do matters, and that we are responsible for our choices and actions. We believe that liberal religion is at its heart free of coercion, which means that it must be freely chosen, a voluntary association. And I can't bring myself to stand up here and tell you that we're wrong about that. And I can't ignore what I know about brains and bodies and biological systems either. So how do we hold something to be both true and not true at the same time? Is it possible something can both exist and not exist?
Yes.
Somebody skipped ahead. One of my theology professors in seminary, in a theology class, made the comment, God is not real, but God exists. To say that whether or not God is an actuality, the existence of God has been brought into being and therefore must be reconciled, reckoned with, and so on. And maybe it's the same thing. Y'all know I love sci-fi, for those of you who are visiting. I love sci-fi. And I've seen my share of artificial intelligence gone wrong movies, where mechanical and electric robots evolve consciousness and become greater than the sum of their parts, and in the movies inevitably turn on their former masters. And I think I know why we are so fascinated with this particular genre. It is exactly what we have done. We have become something more than our biological robots. Our system has sufficiently complexified to be greater than the sum of its parts. This manifests for us, as it does so often for these robot protagonists, as choice. So I want to think about freedom of choice in terms of our very real, very sophisticated ability to map out multiple potential responses to a particular situation. That sounds like something a computer could do. In his 2015 book, Restorative Free Will, philosophy professor Bruce Waller writes that we should focus on our ability in any given setting to generate a range of options and to decide amongst them without external constraint. For Waller, and I think for me as well, it simply doesn't matter that these processes are underpinned by a causal chain of firing neurons. In his view, free will and biological determinism are not opposites, as they have often been taken to be, but really rather describe our behavior at different levels. And he believes this account fits with the scientific understanding of evolution. Evolution, after all, being one of those ideas that shook the notion that we were, in fact, the masters of our fate. Foraging animals, which includes humans and mice and bears and crows, need to be able to generate options for themselves and make decisions in a complex, changing environment. Humans, with our massive brains, are much better at thinking up and weighing options than other animals are. Our range of options is much wider, and we are, in a meaningful way, freer as a result. But we are not entirely free. Our neurological composition creates boundaries around the options that are open to us, just as surely as our race, gender, family, and country of origin, access to education, and other factors beyond our control create boundaries as well. So free will does not exist in the sense that we are not unfettered. We are bound by biology, by social and economic expectation, and by the myriad factors that shape our lives. It would be the height of illusion to believe otherwise. Free will does not exist, but free will is real. Because within what is possible, we remain free to choose, to discern a moral orientation. I happened across a quote on Facebook today. Isn't it the most you thing ever to be like preaching on a Facebook quote? And it was from Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. And he says, you've probably heard this too, we must always take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Elie Wiesel was a vocal witness throughout his life to the utter evil that grows from intolerance and unbridled hatred of people who are not like you. In his most famous work, Night, he recounts in harrowing detail his experiences in the Nazi concentration camps, the utter dehumanization. For Wiesel, the camps were the location not just for the death of millions of people, but for the death of God itself. And yet, despite all of that, when he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, the citation described him in these prophetic terms. Wiesel is a messenger to mankind. His message is one of peace, atonement, and human dignity. His belief that the forces fighting evil in the world can be victorious is a hard-won belief. It is a truly marvelous machine, is it not, that can take the incomprehensible suffering of a concentration camp and turn it into prophetic witness. A truly marvelous machine that has exceeded its programming. And here's the good news. Functionally speaking, we are similarly extraordinary machines, albeit living in a different and perhaps less extraordinary time, but perhaps not less extraordinary. In our own country, The deep flaws in our criminal justice system disproportionately affect people of color in conviction and sentencing. For-profit prisons commodify the incarcerated for their own gain. And in ICE detention facilities, families are being torn apart and children put in cages, again, often for profit. The weeds of hatred and intolerance still grow in our garden. And if free will truly did not exist, we could choose the easy route with an easy conscience, ignoring injustice until it becomes tyranny and blame it on our biology. We could float like paper on the currents of our times, as long as our privilege held up and kept us from being pulled under by those same currents. But we don't choose the easy route. We can't, and we won't. Because there is one more way that we are not free, and it is perhaps the most important of all. We are bound together, whether it is by an inescapable network of mutuality, an interdependent web, a collective unconscious, or a universal divine spark. We are but one world. What touches each affects us all. And if we believe that our own inherent worth and dignity means a life lived as free of coercion as possible, we will seek that kind of freedom for both ourselves and others. We choose engagement. We choose relationship. We choose to be deeply in love with the world even as it breaks our hearts. And we choose to do it again and again and again. Like Gerald Stern's squirrel, our whole souls quivering in the wild dash that is life, finding sparks of love and bringing them together again. And if that's just how my neurons fire, I really do think it's an illusion that I can live with.